In this video, I want to show how aggregate expenditure can be plotted out to illustrate equilibrium in the macroeconomy. And to do so, we'll use what is called the aggregate expenditure model, or sometimes referred to as the Keynesian cross if we have any purists out there. Equilibrium in this context is the level where planned expenditure equals total output, which can be measured using real GDP. So, as we already know, there are four distinct components of aggregate expenditure. They are consumption, investment, or rather planned investment, which is what firms are looking to produce and doesn't include unforeseen changes to inventories. We'll have government spending, and we'll also have net exports in there as well. Now, in our extremely simplified model, we're going to assume that planned investment, government spending, and net exports are actually a fixed or constant amount. That is, they're going to be independent to GDP or the level of income in our economy. This is an oversimplification. However, if we were to plot these components against income, they would be represented as a flat line, essentially, meaning that they're pre-planned or they're exogenous to our model. So planned investment will look something like this. We might have net exports here, government spending, just illustrating the fact that as income increases, there's going to be no change to these fixed components. Now, the component that is impacted by the level of income in the economy is consumption, which, if it were to be plotted, would look like a linear consumption function, which would have a gradient of less than 1. So if we were to plot consumption, looking at the level of spending in our economy and also the level of income, that consumption function might look something like this, with the gradient, which is also determined by the marginal propensity to consume in an economy. So if all the constants in the remainder of our diagram are added, it would actually look something like this. So it would mirror the gradient of the consumption function, as the remainder of the components are actually that constant amount, or that exogenous to the impact of real GDP. So to show equilibrium in the macroeconomy, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce the 45-degree line, or, as I mentioned before, what's sometimes referred to as the Keynesian cross. This line shows all points on the graph where aggregate expenditures is equal to aggregate income. So this line looks something like this, and I'll just illustrate that it's a 45-degree curve. Now we can see here on this diagram that at all points it intersects where aggregate expenditure is equal to income, and economic activity is stable. So what happens then if we input our aggregate expenditure function? Well, this actually is where things get really interesting. So if I just draw our aggregate expenditure, we can use the 45-degree line as a tool for analysis and determine what happens when planned expenditure does not equal input. Now, in this model, the level of equilibrium is going to be determined by where the aggregate expenditure line curve actually intersects the 45-degree line, and we can see at this point this is where equilibrium would be. So equilibrium is, in other words, where spending actually equals output as measured by real GDP in the macroeconomy. So what happens when income is actually lower than the equilibrium level? Well, let's say that we're here at the income of Y1, and at this level, aggregate demand as measured by expenditure is actually higher than what total output is, which is where the 45-degree line would be. So this difference here between actual expenditure and output can be seen as really an excess of demand. So what would happen in reality is people would just start to erode the level of inventories of firms. The level of inventories would actually decrease as people are spending more money than firms are producing. So what happens is that the level of inventories of firms starts to fall, and it acts as a trigger to start producing more. So firms to start producing more to meet this excess demand. So at the area of Y1, what's happening is that spending as measured by AE is greater than the level of output in our economy. The level of inventories, which really is just stock of goods, level of inventories will start to fall, which will act as a trigger for firms to increase their output to meet this excess demand, which overall will lead to an increase of income in the economy. So this increase in output will occur until the amount of output equals the level of aggregate spending, at the point of YE again. So it's kind of like a natural rebalancing to equilibrium in the economy. The opposite will also occur when income is over the equilibrium point at, say, point Y2. Maybe we illustrate Y2 here. It gets a little bit messy in between the real GDP, but that's Y2. At this level, aggregate demand as measured by the aggregate expenditure curve is actually less than output, which is at the 45-degree line. So this area here, is where output is actually greater than spending. So firms aren't selling all of their products, and as firms aren't selling their products, the amount of inventories would build. So as inventories build up, inventories rise, firms will naturally look to lower their output until again they reach the point that output equals spending at YE. So we can illustrate this, looking at Y2, level of spending. Level of spending is actually less than the actual output produced in this economy. What will happen is inventories will build up. So we'll see inventories start to rise as firms aren't selling their products. Output then, naturally will fall as firms become a little bit risk averse, and your total level of income will fall in the economy until it reaches that equilibrium point at YE. So now that we understand this concept, we can use this model to show how changes to one of the components of AE might influence a new equilibrium level of GDP, and we'll look at that relationship in following videos.